you listen to Joe Biden. He's been in the world, in the political world for a long time, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay. Did he start off, having to play all these political games that you have to play, or was it a good cause? And then you look at Mitch McConnell, two names that you talk about in your book. One's a Republican, one's a Democrat. And they're both have some ties to China, right? One, Mitch McConnell, 1993, I think he married his wife, whose father's a very powerful, I don't know if you want to say the business owner, entrepreneur, and they're connected to the communistic regime. And then on the other side, Joe Biden, his son, Hunter, it's all over the news. Everybody's hearing about all the issues with what happened there. I ask it again, this is not something that's favorable to Democrats not liking China or wanting to support China, or this is not just Republicans not liking China or disliking China. This is purely on both sides on what you're seeing.
Right.
And when you went and investigated more, were you kind of like, oh my gosh, I didn't know the Biden family was like this, or the McConnell, was it one of those things where the more and more and more research and investigation you did, the more like this is bigger than you thought it was? Did you have one of those moments yourself?
Well, the one moment that I had was when I got the briefing in the fall of 2014. That was from one of the major audit firms. And when I opened that briefing and I realized, a lot of the elements that we would use to attack a country using an air attack, I saw play out in front of my eyes using economics, finance, and information. And so, that was the moment. It broke my mind, because up until that point, I thought America's the greatest nation on earth, and we're unassailable, we're the most powerful, nothing could happen to us. And that was the point when I realized that, no, we could have carrier battle groups, nuclear subs, F-35s, and all of this capability and spend $800 billion a year on defense. But if our society was basically being attacked at their job level, at their societal level, then we had lost the ability to protect our nation in a globalized, internet-powered world. And from that point on, I just started studying. And I read everything I could, and I talked to everybody I could. So because I had been at the Council on Foreign Relations, I had access to a lot of executives of finance companies, of investment companies. And so I started going around and talking to some of their research offices and talking to people and trying to understand what was going on in our country and how global business worked, how global finance worked, how did investment work. And did I ever stop finding rot? No. I find it every single day. As you continue to pull back the layers of it, you realize it goes through our society because it's based on this fundamental belief that openness will lead to democracy. And that is a key to China, the Chinese Communist Party's power, because when we believe that openness would lead to democracy, they said, there's my opportunity, because they're going to let me have access to their finance, their trade, their investment, their immigration, their media, their politics, the internet, academia. I have access to everything. Think about Commodore Perry sailing in with the Great Fleet into Japan. He had to use guns to get into Japan. We just let the Chinese in, and sometimes we forced them to pay, sometimes we just gave it to them.
It's kind of part of their philosophy, though. If you think about the whole Confucius and art of war, it's battling without having to battle, right? The whole philosophy that you talk about, which was brilliant when you talked about it in the book. But what did you learn from the McConnell family, and what did you learn from Biden's connection to China?
What I learned at the White House, and this was really at the White House, because before you go to the White House, you always hear these stories about, it's the White House calling. People like stand up and like, how can I help you? So I'm at the White House and I'm working with think tanks and law firms trying to, number one, expose what the Chinese were doing, but number two, come up with, credible policy options that we could implement that would get them, that would prevent them from taking advantage of our population. And time after time, they say, sorry, I can't help you. I don't want to anger my Chinese funders or my Chinese customers. My partners aren't comfortable with us because we have a lot of business in China. And I'm like, I'm calling from the White House. And our top think tanks— They would
literally give you this answer.
Top think tanks and the top law firms in the country were telling me, I can't help you. And so, I knew this already, right? So, but then when you really get an understanding of, okay, if they won't even help the White House, then we've got a serious, serious problem.
What did you learn about McConnell and Biden family?
Well, so I put, they're the only ones that I named in the book, and the reason I did is because it's all out in the open. You can go read the sources, the New York Times report, Wall Street Journal reports. Biden, his son, went with him on Air Force Two over to China. 10 days later is named a board member of Bohai Harvest hedge fund, which is a $1.5 billion hedge fund. McConnell, you already talked about, his family, his father-in-law knows Jiang Zemin, former chairman of the Chinese Communist Party, and his sister-in-law is on the board of the Bank of China, right? What influence would you say is there? They would say there is no influence. That just happened, part of McConnell, it happens to be my family relationships. On the part of Biden, he would say, that was my son. You really had nothing to do with me, although he did go over with him on Air Force Two. But that being said, it's not about quid pro quo. It's about adopting Xi Jinping's worldview. And his worldview, which he says at Davos many times, is globalization's good. You know, we should continue to have open markets. We should continue to have open systems so that we can all collectively do well together as a global community. That's essentially, I'm paraphrasing what Xi Jinping says. But that's not what he believes. Because if you read the Chinese Communist Party documents, like, for instance, the document number 9 that have been that have come out of the country and have been translated, then you realize they repudiate every single element of, for example, the Atlantic Charter, which is a good one-page template for the international order, signed by FDR and Winston Churchill, 8 paragraphs, 1 page, democratic principles, free trade, rule of law, and self-determination. That's it. That in a nutshell, that tells you about what the UN, WTO, Bretton Woods, all that's about. The Chinese Communist Party doesn't believe in any of those. So when he goes to Davos, Xi Jinping goes to Davos and he says, we need to stay open for business. It's not we need to stay open for business because democracy, human rights, civil liberty, and rule of law are great. It's because if you stay open for business, I can ensure that we have access to science, technology, innovation, and capital, and talent.